can I get 1 week of this team? 1 week. Match week 1. For 1, we have to go against Arsenal. And for 2, in the first half, we have to put up one of the most bleak performances I've seen as a Manchester United fan. Wow. Just, I'm a little bit more subdued. There were a couple takes where I sat here and I just stared at the camera for a good couple minutes because I genuinely didn't know what to say. But I've calmed myself down a little bit. And I think I'm ready to give a decently structured match review. So, kind of getting into it, you can look at the lineup and you can say, why is Ruben Amorim playing almost 3 false nines? Mason Mount, Mateus Cunha, Brian Mbeumo. 2 of those guys are going to play the 10, but one of them is going to constantly drop in and play as the false 9. And I get it from one point of view, but at the same time, I think all 3 of those guys had a decent enough preseason, or at least cameos in the preseason, to show why they should be starting today. And obviously with Rasmus Højlund, on his way to AC Milan, probably a gap needed to be filled. And I also see Benjamin Sesko, and while I would love for Sesko to get in there and score a first half hat trick, we have to be realistic here. He's not 100% match sharp. I doubt he knows, much of what Ruben Amorim wants. So I wasn't genuinely too upset with the lineup. I knew it was going to be a struggle to score goals. But, a couple weeks ago, I heard on podcasts that Ruben Amorim wanted his team to calm down and that they were building up too fast and that they were starting attacks too fast or getting too rapid and, we'd quickly lose the ball. And that is so 100% true. I mean, it happened under Erik ten Hag, hence why we played that basketball type of football. It happened a lot towards with Ole Gunnar towards the end of his regime. We start up too fast, we lose the ball, and then we're getting caught out every single time, especially with the older midfield that Manchester United may have right now. So I completely agree with that. So can Ruben please explain to me why in the first half we did this about 25 times? We'd win the ball over on the left touchline and then just heave it all the way over to the right, over to Brian Mbeumo, who'd be in a 2-on-1 against Calafiori, whoever it may be, and he'd have Diogo Dalot overlapping him, which at this point, I mean, Dalot is not the best attacking wingback we could have. I get why United played him for the defensive support, but at the same time, the guy's not much going forward. So it's essentially a 1-on-2 because most Arsenal defenders typically don't worry if Diogo Dalot is overlapping and getting the ball on the edge of the box. He doesn't often do a lot with it. So you're kind of pinning Mbeumo in this difficult situation, and then we're taking a quick shot, and it rolls into the hands of David Raya. We're losing the ball. I genuinely saw that happen at least 10 times. I'm being serious. That's not me exaggerating. 10 times I saw that happen. And just to kind of quickly comb over the Arsenal goal, about 4 years ago, Manchester United actually played Arsenal. United won the game 3-2, but Arsenal scored the first goal. And what happened was, it was from a set piece, I actually believe. It was corner or free kick, I don't remember. But Fred had essentially stepped on David De Gea's foot, and De Gea kind of went down, and Arsenal scored. I mean, De Gea was literally laying on the ground, and Arsenal had a wide open goal. They went up 1-0. I think it was 1-0 at that point. From that point on, if you look at a Manchester United goalkeeper, he's essentially going to go down to the floor. He really is. And I could have told you, I should have called it out loud, that United were going to give up a goal from that corner. I mean, first of all, you just look at it. Arsenal are playing 5 wide, a spread offense under Sean McVay for the Rams. I mean, they literally have 3 guys lined up at the line of scrimmage at the edge of the box. What am I supposed to be seeing right here? The ball gets put in. Saliba kind of gets pushed into Bayindir. Saliba also kind of pushes into Bayindir. He goes up. He's, in all honesty, kind of being constricted for going for the ball. And then he kind of goes down, and Arsenal get a pretty easy goal. From both points of view, from the Manchester United point of view, Bayindir is getting blocked. It is being made a lot more difficult for him to go and make an attempt on the ball. But from the Arsenal point of view, that's kind of how the game goes nowadays. Manchester United goalkeepers have this kind of belief around them that they're flimsy, that they're weak, that if you push into them, which you are allowed to do a lot more now in this Premier League, they will go down. As you saw today, we saw it a lot last season. So I kind of see it from both points of view. My number one thing is that if that's called a goal today, fine. Match week one, we have the bar, we have the barometer. That is good enough to be called a goal. In 5 weeks from now, call that a goal as well. You know, last season I saw too many inconsistencies. One week, a contact like that would be called a foul. Next week, it wouldn't. Just give me the bar and I'm fine with it, but stick to it. That's really my main point from the first goal. Like I said, I knew 100%. I never saw Arsenal look so sharp as they were lining up for that. For that 4 vertical play they were lining up there. But the whole entire first half, United were winning the ball and they were just trying to counterattack and they would heave the ball over to Mbumo and just nothing would be created. Mateus Cunha had a couple kind of nifty dribbles in the midfield, but it was just largely uninspiring. And it was uninspiring from Arsenal too. I'll get into them a little bit later. At the end of the first half, I was just genuinely so livid because I saw United play. I was fortunate enough to go to the United-Everton game a couple weeks ago in the summer series, and I sat over in United supporter section, so I had a vertical point of view. I've never been able to see a United game from that point of view. Even though United didn't play great, they didn't. There were still phases of link up, of building up, where you went, okay, Cunha and Mbumo, they're looking good. Rasmus Højlund had a couple kind of almost segments where he was linking up plays somewhat nicely. And, even though United didn't look great in the midfield, they were getting, out physical, if that's a word. They still played a decent somewhat when building up. But there's something we have to learn about this Man United team that has to change instantly. We have to start building up from a point of view to where something doesn't have to go our way. And what I mean by that is if you look at United do a really good build-up, they get the ball from back to front relatively quickly, going through the midfield, the center backs, almost everyone's touching the ball. Something right has to go for Man United. Bruno Fernandes has to flick a ball in between someone's legs. We saw Mateus Cunha do a neat flick around an Arsenal player today. Like, a bit of individual brilliance has to happen every single time United get a successful build-up. Guys, hate to be the bearer of bad news, that's not a successful route to try and, to get back in the Champions League, get back into European contention. Every single center back in the Premier League now, today, is tall. He's physical. He's strong. You're not going to get a lucky flick by every single center back in the Premier League. Every single game. Every single build-up attempt, nonetheless. And that's what I still think United largely base their building up off of. And it kind of confuses me, because I feel like the point of us having these wingbacks and these 2 number 10s, these are supposed to be neat players on the ball. Mateus Cunha is supposed to be neat. Brian Mbumo is supposed to be neat. Patrick Dorgu, who's looked relatively pretty good in his time at United, is supposed to be kind of neat on the ball. But, we're still forcing ourselves to have to be individually brilliant every single time we want something good to go our way. And that's just not a recipe for success. And I know Brian Mbumo and Mateus Cunha are kind of labeled as mavericks and things like that, and I get that. But guys, so many teams have mavericks. Liverpool have mavericks, and they still know how to, build up well together. Manchester City historically have had mavericks and still know how to, string 2 or 3 passes together. Today, especially in the first half, it just wasn't there. There was no type of wanting to build up. And I know you may be saying, well, look at that Arsenal midfield. Zubimendi, Rice, Odegaard. I get that. United don't have those types of legs to compete with that. But that's why we have the wingbacks. That's why we have 2 technical number 10s out there. We're playing Mason Mount as a false 9 or Cunha as a false 9. Whoever was out there, it's still a technical player. They should be able to do a lot better with it than what we're doing. So at the end of the first half, I was very upset. But from the second half on, I genuinely feel like United played a little bit better, and the linking up still wasn't necessarily there. I don't know what what game they were watching, on NBC. They were saying that United, were playing really well in terms of build-up. I didn't see it at all, one bit. But they were still just being more calm on the ball, and that's all I really wanted, which is more calmness, because I know Arsenal are a tough team to break down. I know we're not going to look like, 2010 Barcelona against this Arsenal team. But we were able to calm things down to a certain extent. We were creating chances. It's a little bit better. There still wasn't much going our way in terms of, creating really good chances, but we created enough chances that deserved the goal. And I think overall, that is what I'm most upset about. Because, in all honesty, Arsenal played like a slightly better version of Burnley. They got their goal from the set piece and they didn't really do anything. And they didn't even necessarily set up shop. I would have been fine. I mean, I wouldn't have been happy, but it would have been understandable if they just would have gone, you know what, send 10 guys into the box, park the bus defense, whatever, get out of here with a 1-0 win. That's fine. I respect it to a certain extent. But they didn't. They still tried to play this Arsenal brand of football, and they certainly weren't up to it in any way, shape, or form. They didn't deserve to win that game, and that's what upsets me so much. But it's just the fact that every single game Arsenal is going to get a goal or two. It's just what happens. I wasn't necessarily shocked or upset when Arsenal went up 1-0 because I knew they were scoring regardless of that match. That's the difference between Arsenal and Man United. I mean, there's a lot of differences, but that's probably the biggest one. Arsenal's going to get a goal. How? You don't know. Probably from a set piece, but they're going to score. With Man United, they have individual players. They have the chance. They have the Maverick and Bruno Fernandes, Maverick of all Mavericks, but they don't do it consistently enough. They don't create enough chances. And kind of getting on to substitutions for Man United, because I think that was a big thing of what had Liverpool win the league last season. They were never afraid to make the change. Everyone thinks of the first game against Ipswich. Jarrell Kwanzaa didn't have a great game. He was subbed off almost immediately. Arne Slot pinpointed a weakness and wasn't afraid to change it. And I think that played a big role on why Liverpool won the league last season. But last year with Man United under Amarin, it was just, we just have this thing where we're so afraid to make a first half change or a halftime change. And I think it really revolves around what happened to Joshua Zirkzee in the Newcastle game when he was subbed off in the 23rd minute, and he was visibly upset, as anyone would be. But that type of stuff has to happen in football. That type of, if there's something wrong, you have to go and fix it. You can't spare the team's feelings. You can't spare the players' feelings. At the end of the day, it's your job on the line, Ruben. And I feel like we still just have this problem that unless it's the 70th minute or unless someone's injured, we have to make this change. Guys, we're halfway through the game, 45 minutes in, and things aren't working. There's no build-up. There's no real connection. We're just kind of putting the ball out to Mbeumo and going to say, go make magic happen, And that really upsets me. We don't even make a change until the 65th, 70th minute. And you look at players like Ahmad, who have a decent impact on the game, and he's nutmegging Noni Madueke. He's trying to create chances. That would have been nice to have for a whole 45 minutes, a whole 60 minutes even. We have to shed this mentality of, obviously we care for our players and things like that, but we have to be more forceful when we're on the pitch. We play too passive at times. And especially when you're going up against a super strong Arsenal team, as much as I don't like them, they're really good defensively. They know how to defend super well. When you're going up against that, you need to have your sharpest players on the pitch at all times. So if that means making 2 subs, 3 subs at half, or sub in the 60th minute, that's what you do. And Amram just didn't want to do it. He just has a problem doing it for whatever reason. When you're actually looking at the Man United subs, there's one person I want to talk about. Actually, I don't want to talk about him at all. Really, Manuel Ugarte. I'll be honest with you guys. I wasn't a big fan of Ugarte last season, but I wasn't his biggest hater. I think he is superb at destroying play really well. But the second he gets on the ball, it's like I heard Carl Anka from The Athletic say it best. It's like he has a nosebleed every time he enters the opposition box or the opposition half. And he scored some good goals last season for Man United, and he's a good destroyer. But you get him on the ball in the midfield, it's just, you might as well just give the other team the ball. It would genuinely probably be better. He picks up the ball a couple minutes after he gets subbed on, after Harry Maguire gets subbed on. And I think Kai Havertz is on his back, and without even looking, or it's not Havertz, but somebody's on his back, without even looking, he just passes the ball straight to Havertz, who's 10 yards in front of him. It's just, he comes over the slightest bit of pressure, and he gives the ball away, and it forces Harry Maguire to give away a free kick, which I thought Arsenal was going to score. It's just that type of stuff. You cannot have that type of football if you want to be a winning team. If you want to be a team that's not even winning, competing for European places. A guy like that, you can't have playing that many minutes. And I think with Sesko, he did fine. He did okay. I wasn't really expecting. It would have been nice if we would have gotten a goal. There was a couple instances where the ball was kind of popped around the box, and you were kind of hoping his almost giraffe-like frame could get to it, but he just wasn't able to. It wasn't a bad game from him. And that's the thing that upsets me most. Really, it wasn't a bad game for really any United player, barring maybe Bindier. I think Euro played fantastic. Luke Shaw did really well, stepped in a couple of circumstances. Matthias de Ligt, who I'm not a very big fan of, did really, really well. Casemiro did okay, lost the ball twice in pretty bad circumstances. Bruno Fernandes did decent. It's just Arsenal played bad, but they still found a goal. United played good, but they couldn't score a goal. There's just that disconnect there, and that's something that has to change. And I was hoping we bring in Mbumo, we bring in Cunha, we bring in Sesko. You kind of just have that natural fox in the box goal scorer, dynamic kind of player in there, and it's just not. It just didn't land United's way today. Looking at it quickly from an Arsenal point of view before I get out here, Victor Gyökeres, he was never going to win today. He just simply wasn't. There was too much already pressure that he was going to fail today, that when on every single bad touch you could see it kind of weigh down on him. That's not the Victor Gyökeres that Arsenal bought, and he knows that, and they know that, and he will hopefully from an Arsenal point of view get a lot better throughout the season, but it just simply wasn't the debut of dreams from him. Bukayo Saka, you'd be forgiven for forgetting he was on the pitch. Anytime you saw him do something was when he was, doing a throw-in. He did not make a great impact on the game, or an impact at all, really. Zubimendi, debut, I think from kind of that 6-8 position in which Arsenal employs. If you don't really hear anything about him, that's typically a good game. A solid servant. He's not like a Moises Caicedo. When Moises Caicedo for Chelsea plays well, he plays really well. But at the same time, when he plays bad, he plays bad. I think Zubimendi is someone who just a more consistent player. Declan Rice, consistently fine. Martin Odegaard, I simply can't do it. I've never been the biggest fan of Odegaard. But just Martinelli didn't really do anything. It just wasn't a good game from Arsenal today. And in all honesty, I wouldn't have been surprised if they came in here and stomped United 4-0. I genuinely wouldn't have been surprised at all. I was prepping to see the Twitter post or Instagram post of Ruben Amorim going like this. And, hearing it was the worst loss in Man United's opening game history since 1912, or, whatever it is. I wouldn't have been surprised to see that. But Arsenal weren't up to it. And United played decent in the second half, not great, but at least okay in the second half, and they still couldn't get a goal. You bring in these two dynamic players, and Mbumo and Cunha, and they still couldn't get a goal. But I'm going to try to do this new thing this season. I'm going to try and get out a match review after every single game, where I rate United's overall performance. And today, I'm giving it a 5, possibly a 6. In that range, 5.5, because I don't think United played poorly. But they didn't do enough. They didn't do enough to win or to even get a goal, and that's what upsets me most. But I'm gonna get out of here, guys. I've been talking for 18 minutes. It feels like it's been about 2. But God bless. I'll talk to you all soon. I have faith United will get better. But it's more hope than faith. It's more hope than genuine belief, in all honesty. But I'll talk to you all soon. God bless.